Welcome into the Jazz Notes podcast. I'm your host, Ben Anderson.
I'm Chandler Holt.
We are recording this on Tuesday, August 6th, a big day for the Utah Jazz in the NBA offseason. We will talk about why in just a moment. As always, find us on Twitter at Ben's Hoops, at CHoltKSL, at KSL Sports. Read us at KSLSports.com, anywhere on your social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X. Am I missing any threads? KSL Sports. You can read all of our coverage there. And it's everything now. We've recently added a new Utah, University of Utah beat reporter, a Utah Hockey Club beat reporter as well. So shout out to both of those guys coming over, and Steve Bartle and Cole Bagley jumping on. Very cool. And Chandler providing a lot of additional support with the Utah Jazz this year. So we got a lot of coverage, 360 degrees of all your local sports, including obviously Mitch Harper's excellent coverage of BYU. We've got you covered. So appreciate you following us at KSL Sports. All right, Chandler, we talked about it. Big deal today. August 6th was the first opportunity for the Jazz to agree to a contract negotiation and renegotiation and extension with Lauri Markkanen. And all reports yesterday from Yahoo Sports, today from The Athletic, everything I have told you that I had been told from the people in charge from the Jazz was that this was always been the plan. The Jazz were going to sign Markkanen to an extension this offseason, keep him as a face of the Utah Jazz long term, and the only real wrinkle being that he probably won't sign on the 6th, because then he'd still be eligible to be traded on the February 6th trade deadline, and if he waits until tomorrow, August 7th, he can't be traded during the season, and I thought that actually made sense for both sides.
Yeah, and in the past week, it hasn't even just been the biggest story for the Utah Jazz. It's been the biggest story in the NBA, talking about if he's going to sign that extension, maybe get traded to some place like the Warriors. But today, the reports say it's somewhere around a 5-year, $200 million deal.
And that makes total sense. The wrinkles we're waiting on is how much is the extension for, or the renegotiation. If the Jazz can give him up to $42 million. He makes $18 this year. The Jazz have $35 million in salary cap space, and because it's the last year of his deal, they can give him as much of that as they want, up to the 30% veteran max contract. They can't go above 42. They also don't have to go to 42. They just have to get within 125% of what the max is next year. So when they sign him to a contract extension, also this summer, and it'll all come together as one deal, basically, he gets that 125% raise that gets him up to the max. So he has to be at least $33 million, but can go up to as high as $42 million. And actually, I think the Jazz can use that as some negotiating leverage to say, hey, Lauri, why don't we just give you 33 and then we'll give you a full max? Or we'll give you 42 now, you get an extra $9 million this season, but why don't you work with us a little bit on the terms of your contract, and maybe it decreases actually a little bit over the life of it, and you still make the full $9 million, but you just don't get it all up front. Yeah. Or you get the $9 million up front versus later on. There's a couple of different options. Or the Jazz can just say, here's $42 million, and then here's the full max, and we love you. And because we love you so much, you're going to listen to us, even if it means you're playing 45 games next year as we tank for Cooper Flagg. Like, all of that stuff is related. Yep. It's all in this conversation right now with the Jazz. And, you go to Lauri and say, you give us a little financial wiggle room, it makes it easier to build a winner around you, and that's what we're committed to doing. It's just not going to be this season.
Yeah, it's all about keeping Markkanen happy, right? He's your star player. But I do think that the best case scenario for the Jazz is, like you said, a front-loaded contract, so that, that in the next year or two, he can make all of his money, and then when the Jazz are getting more and more competitive, they will have more freedom with their money to spend and be more of a buyer.
And then on top of that, like, we're getting to this point with these $75 billion TV deal that's coming in. It's 10 times or whatever what they're making. It's so much money. It's such a huge increase that the salary cap, because the NBA Players Association gets 51% of basketball-related income, the salary cap is going to be so huge 3 years from now, 4 years from now, with these 10% increases every year, including next season when the TV deal actually kicks in. His deal is going to look pretty paltry compared to what the 75, potentially $80 million deals that guys like Jason Tatum are going to be owed. I don't think you're going to see that type of number for Markkanen. Again, we're talking about 5 years, $200 million net worth. That's $40 a year. I mean, he might be honestly making half of what other All-Stars in the NBA are making who signed their deal a little bit later.
Yeah, like you said earlier, Markkanen is on one of the best deals, $18 million, like just for value. And then in a few years with all the changes coming with the CBA, it could be the same. He could be making $40 million and still have an underpaid contract.
So it's a smart deal. It's good timing for the Jazz. It always made sense to bring him back. I always thought it made more sense than trading him unless they got an absolute crazy offer from somebody. And honestly, just Brandon Pajemski and Moses Moody and all the picks wasn't good enough, in my opinion. And I don't know if they ever crossed that line with Golden State. Jake Fisher at Yahoo Sports reported the Jazz got down the road pretty far with the Sacramento Kings. I don't know what all those looked like. Be curious to hear what some of those details are as they come out. But there wasn't ever the obvious, oh yeah, you got to say yes to that deal. Maybe if it was Kuminga and Pajemski and Moses Moody and all their picks, I would have considered that. But anyone trying to short you on Lauri Markkanen was stupid, especially with all the financial implications that we're talking about right now and how beneficial it's going to be to re-sign him. So if I'm a Jazz fan, I'm happy today.
Yes.
I think this is a good move for the team to keep him around long term.
There will be some more Markkanen talk in the mailbag, but real quick, let's touch on a couple more pieces of news. First, we talked about this last week, but just to reiterate, the Jazz documentary will debut on Jazz Plus on the 12th. It'll be on the Jazz's YouTube on the 13th, and then there will be a Delta Center watch party on the 19th.
I think it's the 10th, right?
Oh, the 10th?
The 10th.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
the 10th, you can go and see it,
Awesome.
which is Saturday. And it's going to be at the Delta Center. I want to make sure I have that right. But, yeah, the Utah Jazz documentary is going to debut early if you want to go and check it out at the Delta Center coming up on Saturday night.
Awesome.
So you have a chance to go see that. It's free. There's going to be vendors open. You have to pay to get food. They're not giving you free food. But, yes, there is the opportunity to see it coming up early. And then, yeah, if you're a Jazz Plus subscriber, you see it on the 12th. If you just follow them on YouTube, you can see it on the 13th.
And then last piece of news before we get into the mailbag, the Jazz released their preseason schedule yesterday. It starts on October 4th against the New Zealand Breakers. That's a home game. Next one's also a home game against the Houston Rockets. And then back-to-back away games in Texas against Dallas and San Antonio. One more home game against Sacramento on the 15th. And then the last preseason game on the 18th in Portland.
6 preseason games,
Yep.
a lot. They have not announced what the broadcast schedule is going to be, but they're all going to be on TV.
Yeah.
They always do. It's been a few years since they haven't had one on TV, and even then, you could find the arena feed. Now that they have Jazz Plus, there's a real reason to keep that going and make it available for fans. And they're still on board with K-Jazz. That doesn't seem like it's changed. So that's a good sign for Jazz fans going forward. There should be access to watch these games, and 6 of them is a lot.
Yep.
You can find that whole schedule again if you missed it at KSLSports.com. You can just Google Jazz preseason schedule, KSL Sports, and you'll find it. I've got it written up right there for you. Put it out yesterday. Any other bits of news? Oh, yeah, one little piece. Micah Potter re-signs with the Jazz.
Oh, yes.
Micah Potter coming back on a 2-way deal. I'm a little surprised by that. I thought there might be a little bit more interest in him, especially because he was on the reserve USA Olympic team and the select team, they call it, and played okay and seemed to make some friends. But it's who he is. He's a 2-way contract guy. He had signed a 2-year 2-way deal with the Jazz and is coming back for another year. So good for the Jazz. That's a pretty low-cost guy to come in who's a very good locker room guy, extremely nice, and still has some upside as a shooter where if you keep developing him and maybe he can find a way to be a useful third big in the future. I'm not sure how much higher his ceiling is than that, but Jazz re-signed Micah Potter. Other piece of news this week. All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. We will address a lot of mailbag questions with a lot of conversation about Lauri Markkanen's contract. Stick around. More Jazz Notes coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. As always, every Tuesday around 11-ish Mountain Time, I send out a question on my Twitter account at Ben's Hoops. Chandler, you retweet it. Asking for your questions for this week's mailbag. Get about an hour to respond, and then we try to address them. So I appreciate everyone following me on Twitter at Ben's Hoops or Chandler at C Holt Sports to get this mailbag prompt, and then we answer your questions on the podcast and in an ensuing article, though we answer more on the podcast than we do in the article, so it benefits you to reply to the tweet. All right, let's get started. Where are we starting?
Let's just start at the top here. First question from Jer Banks. Do you know if the City Edition jersey that will come out next fall is going to be sky blue?
I have not heard.
Yes.
I just haven't seen the City Edition at all. That blue, though, was quite obvious.
Yes.
That sky blue that the Jazz put in there as a featured color in the trim would lead me to believe that that's probably likely and that the Utah Hockey Club has that color figured very prominently, and there seems to be some desire to have tie-in between what those two teams look like playing in the same building owned by the same owner. But I don't know. But I would guess yes. And there's history with that uniform in the Jazz recent past with obviously Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer and Mehmet Okur and Andre Karolinka wearing it. So I would imagine, yes, we will see it.
Honestly, I like how they did that. Tied it in the sky blue with both teams. It would have been easy to do purple or one of the other main Jazz colors, but I like how they added it to the Jazz, and then we'll feature it with the hockey team as well.
So we will see more of it. I don't know in what regard, but I suspect we will see more of it.
Next up from Aggie fan Dan, any sneak peek for the schedule release date or rumored games? Also, how does the NHL schedule impact the Jazz schedule? In recent years, the NBA announces the season somewhere around mid-August. Last year was August 18th. The year before it was August 17th. So a little bit less than 2 weeks from now should be.
Yeah. And they will. That's an NBA thing. That's not a Jazz thing.
Yeah.
Some Jazz things like this documentary, and this is me speculating, have been pushed back because of the hockey team and how much work they've had to do getting the hockey team up and running and not having an entire hockey staff hired to come in and do all those jobs. Like Jazz people have been pulling double duty. So some things have gotten pushed back, but the schedule is done by the NBA. Yeah. So the Jazz schedule will come out at the normal time. And maybe the Olympics pushes it back a touch, but mid-August we will hear. I've not heard opening dates or anything. In fact, I don't know how much the Jazz know before like the first few days, because they do their big schedule release and they have to go and hire people to do all that stuff and help with outside so they can get their videos, and every team around the league does it. They probably get some hint of games, but I don't think they get it like so early, other than maybe a handful of games, but I have not heard them. And to address the hockey aspect of this, it's absolutely going to matter. There are specific nights when the NHL likes to play that the NBA doesn't play a very heavy schedule. The NBA only plays a couple of games on Thursday night to focus their TNT games. And then some of that will change in the future going forward when NBC and Peacock are carrying games in 2025 and Amazon's carrying games, and you're going to have that 7 nights a week schedule when you're going to have several different outlets to watch all the games. But all of that will continue to change and influence when the Jazz are able to play at home versus play on the road. And, we saw more Sunday home games for the Jazz last year. The NBA mandated that. There may even just have to be more this year because you're sharing an arena.
Yeah. Next question here from Levi. Assuming no trades before the season start, what's the starting five? How in the world do we get the young guys minutes?
Keontae's going to start.
Yes.
Lauri's going to start. I think Colin Sexton starts.
Yes.
And then the other two are pretty wide open. My guess would be John Collins. Honestly, my guess would still be John Collins. There's a chance he's not on the roster. But you said barring trades.
Yep.
So I would say John Collins would be my fourth. And at that point, you're probably Taylor Hendricks.
Yes. That's exactly the one that I had, 1 through 5. Sexton, George, Markkanen, Hendricks, Collins.
I think there's a chance you could go Sexton, George, Cody Williams, Markkanen at the 4, big buff Markkanen now, beefing up, and then Collins at the 5.
Yeah.
And you could be really long and rangy. And if you were just focused purely on getting guys minutes, I think that's certainly possible. You could go Keontae, Colin. I think that's your backcourt. That's where and Markkanen. I think those three are actually relatively safe. Colin was so good last year when he started. I think it would be hard to take him out of the lineup at this point. And Jordan Clarkson saying he's up for the idea of being winning another 6 Man of the Year award, I think might make it easy to bring him off the bench. Then you could go either Cody or Taylor at the 4, and you could put Walker at the 5.
Yeah.
Because both those guys can space the floor conceivably. So there's options there, but my guess would be Keontae and Colin in the backcourt, Lauri at the 3, Taylor at the 4, and John Collins at the 5. That's just kind of my gut tells me that, but I didn't think Taylor Horton-Tucker would be starting last year, and he started the first few games of the season.
Next up from Utah Jazz News, should the Jazz give an offer to Isaac Okoro?
They surprised me last year by giving Paul Reed the restricted offer, and he ended up getting matched by Philadelphia. I'm not still totally sure what that was about for the Jazz. Maybe they were doing somebody a favor, an agent a favor, and getting their guy paid. I guess you could do the same thing with Isaac Okoro. I think the Jazz are going to, and we might address this in another question, I think the Jazz are going to maintain their salary cap space for teams that getting up to the beginning of the preseason, so over the next 2 months, and we're still 2 months out from the preseason starting, start to worry a little bit about being either over the luxury tax or up over the tax apron and want to maintain more flexibility in the season and are looking for teams that have salary cap space, like the Jazz should still have over $10 million even after signing Lauri Markkanen, and say, hey, can we unload a player? We'll take back a John Collins or a Jordan Clarkson and we'll give you $30 million in salary going your way, but you can basically absorb them into your space, sending a smaller contract back, and we'll throw in a draft pick or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't think the Jazz are going to sacrifice that movement by signing someone like Isaac Okoro, even though I think he could make some sense. But he's probably going to add 3 or 4 wins to you, and 3 or 4 wins on a 30-win team is a bad idea.
Yes.
30 to 34 is really detrimental. 30 to 26 is really beneficial for the Jazz next year. So you probably want to aim more for how do you get to 26 wins, not how do you get to 34 wins.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting. Do you think that Okoro would fit well? I just think that, like you said, the Jazz are looking to lose next year. It's pretty obvious. And I just feel like Okoro, one, he does make you better, but also I feel like he would take a lot of opportunity from a lot of the younger players.
Yeah, if you're willing to not play Bryce Sensabaugh next year,
yeah,
sure. Like, you can play him. He goes out there and he gives you some structure and defends the opposing team's best player and takes that burden off of Bryce or Keontae George or Taylor Hendricks. I think that makes some sense. There's value there.
Yes.
But, yeah, whatever. You know, it's like, how worried are you that you lost Chris Dunn? Like, he was fun. Chris Dunn was a fun player to have. He doesn't radically change the outlook of your team, and I think that's probably something Isaac Okoro would bring.
Next question from Steven Ritter. Once the Lauri money is finalized, what kinds of moves are going to be available for the Jazz, and which would be the best if they're trying to balance long-term development and short-term losing? Any names, free agency or trade, we should keep on our radars?
Most of the good names are gone.
Yes.
So improving is probably out the window. Maybe keep an eye on a couple of these like second chance guys who failed as first-round picks and then end up coming back around the league. But like even those guys, like the Zaire Williams for Memphis who got traded to Brooklyn. Am I right on that? Like that was probably an okay bet for them to take. I don't know how many of those guys are out there that the Jazz would still have some interest in.
Yeah.
Those are names that I may have kept an eye on for the Jazz. Not that they also need to get any younger.
True.
You know, that's the other aspect. So, yeah, the deals I'm keeping an eye on are teams unloading salaries to get themselves some luxury tax benefits, and the Jazz getting extra draft picks, which is exactly what we saw with Russell Westbrook.
Let's use that as a transition to Glenn Anderson's question. What are the odds of us trading Collins, Sexton, or Clarkson before the season and before the trade deadline?
Sexton, I would say relatively low.
Yes.
Again. I would keep really an eye on. I think Clarkson probably makes the most sense because his salary is the easiest to trade. He makes the least of those 3. You know what you're getting. He doesn't have a ton of upside value for the Jazz other than he's beloved here and is a good locker room guy, but can help a good team win.
Yeah.
So I would look at somebody like Chicago, and they're actually still under the luxury tax, I believe, so maybe they don't have any emphasis to do it other than Jerry Reinsdorf wants to win, and they see like $30 million or whatever they owe Lonzo Ball to not play this year. If the Jazz wanted to say, hey, we don't want to pay John Collins next season, but we'll take on the $40 million for Lonzo Ball, you get $25 million in John Collins' contract, and there's a chance he opts out after this season. You can win games with him, ideally. Hopefully he makes you a little bit better, and you're better, or you're a play-in team again in the East, which they seem satisfied with in Chicago. And you don't have to pay all. You save $15 million on Lonzo Ball's contract. I could see something like that. I guess those are the types of names I'd keep an eye on for the Jazz. But, again, that's not a report by any means. That's just those are the types of moves you could see a team potentially make.
And I think that I agree that Clarkson has the most trade value at this point, and especially come mid-season, I feel like there'll be some team that is just looking for an extra spark off their bench, and Clarkson will probably be the most available and best option.
Yeah, let's say Eric Gordon absolutely stinks in Philly.
Yes.
But Philly's close. Like, Philly's actually the second best team in the Eastern Conference behind Boston. They've outperformed New York. They're better than Cleveland. They're better than Milwaukee. And they need one more guy. They need one more reliable ball handler who can score big points. And they say, okay, we've got a $20 million deal. This guy didn't work out. We hate it. Here's Jordan Clark, or here's this player for Jordan Clarkson.
Yeah.
The Clippers would make a lot of sense for Jordan. If midway through the season, P.J. Tucker and Bones Highland aren't giving them anything, they like the idea of Bones Highland. P.J. Tucker's not in the rotation, but they combine those contracts, which are like $15 million. For Jordan's $13 million, but they're over the luxury tax. So if you shave $1.5 million off and you're over the luxury tax, you're actually cutting $4 million, and the Jazz get another second-round draft pick in 2032 because they already own their 2030 pick.
Yep.
So those are the types of names I would keep an eye on. Those are the types of moves. And where Jordan Clarkson, he's pretty plug and play.
Yes.
That's what's great about Jordan. Colin is a little bit of not a square peg in a round hole, but is a little bit specific. And John Collins is very specific.
Yes.
That's the hard part about John Collins. He has a very specific role that you have to make room for him. So Clarkson, 6-man. We've all seen those guys. I mean, he's a prototypical 6-man shooter, scorer. Those guys fit on a lot of rosters, and Jordan does, and has an easy contract to move.
And also, I'd be interested to see how Clarkson performs when he goes to a team trying to be more competitive, because I feel like the past couple seasons with the Jazz, he's just had the ultimate green light. And then when he goes to a new team, he'll actually sort of have to fit into their system, and I think that he could do that.
And he's shown a willingness to do it. He was a little wild in L.A. and Cleveland and got to Utah, and Quinn Snyder said, hey, let's cut out the bad shots and let's take good shots, and we'll make you a really good player, and he won 6-man of the year.
Yep, exactly.
So he has buy-in because he's a great guy.
Next up from Jake the Lynx, how excited are we about Lauri's long-term extension? How soon, realistically, do you think Lauri could play his first playoff game in Utah? I would say not the upcoming season, but the next one.
2026?
Yeah.
If he wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, best case scenario for the Jazz rebuild would be you randomly win the lottery, you get one of these guys in the top 4. You know, Cooper Flag's just a name I'm going to use as a placeholder for the rest of the year because I have not watched Edgecombe yet. I've just not watched these guys. I'm not going to watch an AAU game for Cooper Flag. I saw some of the Olympic run-up stuff, but like, let me see him at Baylor. Let me see him at Rutgers. Let me see him at Duke. Like, let me see these guys actually play, and then I can start telling you whether Dylan Harper can play or whoever it is. You know, I don't. But until then, I don't care.
Yeah.
So just using the name, the placeholder, you win that guy. You win the lottery. You draft that guy. You have salary cap space, and you say, well, Lauri's here. You've got these young players. One of the young guys has broken out. Like, Keontae's really broken out. Cody's on his way, or Taylor's on his way. And then you have $35 million in salary cap space, and you go and get 2 players making 17 each that come in. You've got Colin Sexton still under contract, and you're good.
Yep.
And then you also have your Edgecombe or Cooper Flag or whoever, and they are the next guy, like, really coming up. And you don't have to rely on them to win games their first year, but you can play them a lot. And then by year 2, you've already tasted the play-in tournament, and then they're coming through and having big second years, and you can win. But yeah, you could be a play-in team in 2026.
Yeah.
I can absolutely see that. The West is going to fall off quick. Like, the Clippers are falling off. Lakers are going to fall off. Warriors, I think, are going to fall off. Like, the West will open up at some point. I know there's this fear that, the West is going to be good forever. It's like, it never works that way.
No.
So teams rise and fall. Denver could fall off.
Yeah.
So there's room for that.
Something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I really like about the spot the Jazz are in right now, with all their young players, let me list them off real quick. Isaiah Collier, Kyle Filipowski, Keontae George, Taylor Hendricks,
Bryce Sensabaugh.
I think Bryce Sensabaugh. I was going to say Walker Kessler, but we're going to move past that for now. Cody Williams. I think that's like 6 names. I think if only 3 of them hit, and for a hit we can call it an above average role player, I think the Jazz are in a tremendous spot.
And that's the whole plan, right? Like, get a bunch of swings. You don't need to hit 6 home runs.
Yes.
You need to hit 2, and you really need to hit 1 home run. You need another guy on base.
Yes, exactly.
And you've positioned yourself to do that. Like, one of these guys is going to far outperform expectations and be a good player, and that will be a part of your real core. And then another guy's going to have some value, and then you trade the young guys before they lose their value, the way you did with Ochai.
Yes. Like,
before they're totally sunk costs, you trade them and try and maintain that asset value. That's absolutely the plan. And if more guys work out, great. And if some of them don't, fine too.
Yep.
You know, you can look back at Oklahoma City, and like, they traded Alperen Şengün.
Yep.
Like, they whiffed on that. That was a great player that they traded, and Oklahoma City still overwhelmingly expected to be the best team in the Western Conference. You got to give yourself room to make mistakes. The problem with the last iteration of the Jazz is they were so specific in what they had to add that when you drafted Udoka Azubuike, it's such a critical mistake not getting Desmond Bane or not getting Jaden McDaniels that it doesn't cripple your franchise, but it eliminates your ability to take that next step.
Yeah, and it's
so
definitely
you want
a
to have
setback.
you want to have 10 options to fail, because if one of them hits, you take that next step.
Yeah.
So that's where the Jazz are.
Next up from El Cartero de los Jazz, with Markkanen's extension secured, is Colin Sexton now the leading trade candidate?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I think it's Jordan.
Me as well.
And I think if the Jazz could maybe have their preference, might be John Collins,
Yes.
just because he makes so much more money. But no, Colin might have the most value. $18 million is a good starter. Then again, the league is so oversaturated with good guards.
Yeah.
It's hard to trade guards. DeJounte Murray did not net the Hawks anywhere near what they paid for him.
Mm-hmm.
So don't take a bath on that. You don't have to trade Colin.
Next up from Tiefers, what salary dumps are out there that the Jazz could facilitate for assets? What's the likelihood of doing that after Lauri signs?
High,
Yes.
in my opinion. I think the Jazz are going to do that, which is, again, why I think they're going to maintain salary cap space going up until the day before training camp starts, if not the day before the regular season starts. There's no reason to spend it. They will be at the salary floor however they need to get there. That's not a big deal. And then you maintain your space to make moves and take advantage of another team that's desperate.
Yep.
Whether that's the Lakers or the Clippers. I mentioned PJ Tucker and some of those combined deals. That's the hard part, is like some of these teams that are actually still not quite at the second apron can put two players together in trades. They can aggregate trades. Some teams can't. It's hard to just find like the single one-off. I brought up Lonzo Ball. That's maybe the clearest one-off, but I also brought up the Clippers with PJ Tucker and Bones Highland. Those are the types of options you could find. Some team may just want to say, hey, we're not even at the apron. Like I just kind of looked at apron teams that are right there to put together not even a list, but just kind of some names that might fit. There might be a team that just says, hey, you know what we'd rather have? $15 million in flexibility in season to make trades. Even if we're not close to the salary cap, we'd actually like to have a little more flexibility than we do right now.
Yeah.
And that's where, maybe Denver comes in and like Zeke Naji, they're just like, man, we hate this guy. I hate Zeke Naji. That was a bust. And we gave him 3 years, $80 million, or not 80, 3 years, $30 million, whatever they gave him, $28 million. It's like, he's not worth $8 million. And we're a championship team. We've got to get out from that $8 million to have more flexibility. Jazz take him, and we'll give you something else. And the Jazz is like, well, okay. Guy on his second, who's early in his second contract, who might have a little more upside than Denver's able to show with him. Sure, we'll take a chance on that. So all of those options are on the table for the Jazz and things I'd keep an eye on.
Couple more questions from Tiefers.
Sorry to interrupt. Teams make mistakes.
Yeah.
Like Dallas went out in the offseason last year and acquired Grant Williams. It was their big kind of free agency signing. And then he wouldn't stop, quote unquote, yapping. He's a yapper. And Luka hated him and Dallas hated him, and they had to shift and trade him. Like, so wait a couple. You can maintain roster flexibility and be a scapegoat for teams, or be a landing spot for teams to unload a guy like P.J. Washington. And again, Grant Williams. And this is where I think Jordan Clarkson has value. I know I've repeated myself a couple of times on this in prior podcasts, but like P.J. Washington was not a super highly valued asset. I liked him as a player, but not like this crazy valuable asset for teams. But he goes to Dallas and he's a perfect fit, and he's an upgrade from Grant Williams, and all of a sudden, everyone wishes they had P.J. Washington.
Yep.
That's a very similar situation for Jordan Clarkson to me, where he doesn't have a lot of positive value right now for the Jazz, but on the right team, in the right spot, he has a ton of value.
Yep.
So a team says, we made a huge mistake signing X player, Y player. They are not what we needed at all. Najee Marshall, I'm bringing up Dallas again or whatever. Will you take Najee Marshall off our hands? We'll take Jordan Clarkson back and we'll save $3 million and get a player who might better fit. Sure, Jazz can do that and then take advantage of you by getting an asset. Those things remain on the table, and I wouldn't give up that flexibility if I were the Jazz to sign some middling free agent that's not going to give you anything.
Another one from Tiefers. Which rookies will start the season in the G League?
Collier. I actually think Bryce Sensabaugh. He's not a rookie, but I bet Bryce is in the G League. And again, the G League actually doesn't start until a little bit later. So they will all start with the Jazz.
Yep.
A lot of them will be inactive. But then the G League starts early December, something like that. So they'll start getting sent down around then. So the other question is who actually is in the rotation.
Yes.
And I would say Cody and probably Filipowski.
You think Filipowski makes the rotation?
I think Filipowski gets some minutes.
Okay.
I think he will play better than Taylor Hendricks in like training camp, because does so much that the Jazz don't do, and Taylor does too. I'm not selling my Taylor Hendricks stock. Kyle's as old as Filipowski's as old as Taylor Hendricks is right now.
Mm-hmm.
He played 2 years of college. Taylor only played 1. And he played at Duke. He played at a really high level, and he was the focus of that team for 2 straight years. Like, we saw how good Kyle can be in the summer league, and he can rebound and dribble and make good passing decisions. Like, the Jazz don't have a good passer on the team. They're a terrible passing team. Filipowski can pass. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see some early minutes for Filipowski rivaling or matching Taylor Hendricks.
Okay.
So that I think Cody and Flip both play. And then look, Flip probably ends up in the G League.
Yeah.
Because
eventually.
you want to give him 25 minutes a night to play. But if early on the Jazz don't want to accidentally jump out to a 7-8 record and say, man, we only got 25 wins this year. We've already got 15 into the season. The way you do that is by playing Kyle Filipowski a lot, playing Cody Williams a lot, playing Bryce Sensabaugh a lot to lose games.
Last question here, another one from Tiefers. Who's filling the last 2 roster spots?
This goes back to are you taking Bones Highland and PJ Tucker for Jordan Clarkson? That's really where it comes down to, and I think that's who it will be. Yeah. Those types of players. And I wouldn't rule out Simone Fontecchio 2.0, which is who's the best international player right now, not in the NBA, that will sign for $3 million and come over. It's not going to be Cheetah, the Pro Cheetah that the Jazz signed. They call him Cheetah, is his nickname. It will not be him. He's not coming over this year, but something like that. Who's a good international player from this year's Olympics that maybe turned some heads, and the Jazz said, oh, he'll sign a $3 million deal and we can trade him for a borderline first-round pick 2 years. Like Danny Ainge hit with Fontecchio, he might believe he can do it again.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning into the Jazz Notes podcast. We will be back next Tuesday. Maybe have some more news regarding the actual numbers of Markkanen's deal.
And then maybe more signings.
Exactly. But yeah, make sure to check us out on KSL Sports. You can find me at C-Hole Sports and Ben at Ben's Hoops.
We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in.